We're going to cover this thing. I know my audience. I know where I live. I know many people that are watching this show right now supported Donald Trump and may even believe the election was stolen. You're wrong. You're wrong. The election wasn't stolen. The election was fair. It was held, and Donald Trump lost. In fact, he lost by 8 million votes, but that's a whole nother issue because we do use the Electoral College as a means of how we elect our presidents. We can have a debate another day on whether or not that's fair. Count me in as a one person, one vote type of individual. I've always had a problem with that. And that isn't just when a Democrat was in office. I've always had a major problem with an individual's vote not counting because they're from a certain state. Joe Biden won by 8 million votes. That was enough for me in the first place. But what happened? What happened on this day? That insurrection. And I read to you the definition of insurrection. It doesn't get more clear than that. It was an attempted overthrow of the government and the process of government of certifying the new president of the United States because somebody was mad that he lost. Well, we just got done speaking to Congressman Kelly Armstrong, came out with some strong words as a Republican and hasn't backed away from them because he's still ticked. You know, when you're in the Capitol and you're forced to hide under a desk or in a room from insurrectionists, it matters. Well, another individual that I respect immensely was in that Capitol, and she was on the Senate floor, and that is United States Senator Tina Smith from the great state of Minnesota. Senator Smith, good to have you coming down the road with us.
Well, it's great to be with you, Joel. It's great to be able to see you in person, even if it's virtual.
Well, the last time you saw me, I didn't have my I'm going ice fishing goatee. So I don't want you to think I'm lazy and don't shave anymore. I'm just telling you that this is all about being, this is about drilling holes outside. Senator, you were on the floor that day. You were in the Capitol working. Give me your thoughts. Give me what was going through your mind.
Well, I just was on the floor not too long ago giving a speech looking back on January 6th. And, you know, I was remembering that I was sworn into office for the third time in 3 years on January 3rd. And my husband, Archie, had been out here with me. And as he headed back to Minnesota the day before January 6th, he said, "Now, are you going to be okay?" And I said to him, "Archie, please, the United States Capitol has got to be one of the safest places in the whole country." Little did I know. And I think that, you know, as I think back on that day and being on the Senate floor, it was so surreal. It was hard to even process what was happening. And when the Capitol Police came onto the floor and they whisked away the vice president, who, you know, at that point we didn't know there was this mob that was hunting him down. And they told us that the Capitol had been breached. It was just incredible. It was terrifying, but in a very weird, surreal way.
Can I ask you the same question I asked Congressman Armstrong, which is this: if you think those insurrectionists had gotten to the vice president or to Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, do you think they'd be alive?
I think that we were just seconds away in some cases from complete and utter mayhem and murder. I really do. I mean, you could see in the as those insurrectionists, you know, came onto the Senate floor, some of them with zip ties, with bludgeons, you know, rifling through people's desks, trying to find some sign of where we were. I think that there were deeply dangerous people in that mob, and they were there believing, because the president had told them. It wasn't like they just sort of made this up out of whole cloth. There was nothing organic about this. This was instigated by the then president, that they needed to get to Mike Pence and they needed to persuade Mike Pence to stop the count. And that's what they were hell-bent to do.
So let's talk about that a little bit, because the more we find out about it, which I don't think surprises someone of your intellect, that you understand things like this don't just happen, that to get the number of people there to form the mob, the insurrectionists that they became, you know, when you peel that onion back, there was organization to it. There was intent to it. And that January 6th committee is really starting to bring that forward publicly. And so explain to me what your gut tells you what role the president of the United States at the time, Donald Trump, and the people around him were doing, what their intent was, how you think this was going.
Well, let me tell you, just to give you an insight into that, after the senators were basically rapidly evacuated from the Senate chamber, and we ran down a hallway and downstairs, and we got to a safe place, and we were all there, Republicans and Democrats, trying to figure out what was going on. And some of my colleagues on the Republican side, Lindsey Graham and others, were trying to get to the president, were trying to reach him. They were calling his daughter and others in the president's orbit and trying to get him to basically to send out a message to call off the mob, to tell them that this was wrong, that they had to go home, that this is not what he intended. And many, many, many moments went by before the president finally said something that was completely inadequate. And we now know from what we're hearing that he was sitting in the White House watching television. And we also know that there was a group of his advisors who had set up kind of a war room at the Willard Hotel, which is right around the corner from the White House, you know, tracking events. And I think that tells me a lot about what was really going on. But this is why, Joel, the work of the January 6th Commission is so important. And, you know, I have to say, I disagree with a lot of what Liz Cheney does, but she is a true patriot, and she is showing the importance of putting aside our partisan differences for the good of our democracy. And I deeply respect the way she's handling this.
Well, and it seems to me, or at least the common sense that I was born with and my parents put into me, tells me that if you are surrounding the president, if you are the individuals in his family and others that are calling on him to call it off, they believe themselves that he called it on. That they believe themselves that he had the power to call it on, he has the power to call it off. I had an individual on my radio show ask me, and they said, well, what makes you think he could have called it off? And I said to him, I go, look, everybody, you saw it constantly. You saw the individuals. All that he needed to do was send out that alert. They were going to see it. They were all recording it. They were all talking. You know, it seems to me that had he called it off, it would have stopped, Senator.
Well, and I mean, understand how it started. I mean, there was a long lead up. There was a ton of planning. That's all right out there on social media. This was not some secret plan. We failed to appreciate the severity of it. But he called people to Washington. He exhorted them to march on the Capitol. He urged them to do whatever it took. He asked them to fight like hell. And that's what happened. And it really wasn't until he finally, you know, came out and in a, you know, a very half-assed way said, you know, everyone should stand down, that we finally were able to get control of the situation. And meanwhile, do you know that January 6th was the most deadly and dangerous for law enforcement since 9/11? Mm-hmm. It was a tragedy. Many people lost their lives. Many people were injured. You know, today, as I was on the Capitol, and everybody there, journalists and, you know, members of Congress, were all trying to go up to Capitol Police and just thank them and show some, kind of connect with them. And I mean, what they went through was really hell.
So, you know that I know this because I've got a big sister, much older than I am, I want to add.
Really childhood, Joel, or was it just completely different?
but I have a sister who told me, and it doesn't surprise me, the relationship that you build with the people that are around you every day. You walk by, you say hi, how is your wife, how is your kids, how's your husband, how's your kids, those kind of conversations. These people that you saw that were on the front line of this, in many cases, were friends. And so what was going through your mind as you watched that, or as you went back and maybe couldn't see that in real time, but saw it later?
Yeah, well, you're right. I mean, I'm a United States Senator, but basically I go to work every day, and I've got work colleagues, and I've got people that work in the same building that I do, the electricians and the custodians and the kitchen workers that make sure that the place works, the stenographers that hour after hour record what every senator says. We're all in that same boat together. And one of the things that sticks in my mind is we were being run out of the Capitol chambers and into the secret location where we were safe. We were walking by people who, mop the floors and take care of our office buildings every day. And they're just looking at us sort of in horror, like, where are you going? And I'm thinking to myself, where are you going to go?
Yeah.
Where are you going to make sure that you're safe? It is, fundamentally, that's just a really human thing. And it's just important to remember. And that's why I get so pissed off when I hear some of the members of Congress trying to rewrite history and say, oh, it was just a few tourists that got, a little bit out of hand, or trying to turn into martyrs these individuals that were bludgeoning and crushing Capitol Police. I just become infuriated by that.
The strong statements that came out where you were there by Mitch McConnell, by Lindsey Graham, by others, and then they walked it back. They took it back. Is that just done out of fear of Donald Trump, or what the heck's going on there?
I was just saying on the floor earlier today how I listened to Senator Graham come onto the Senate floor when we came back to finish our work and to certify the election results. And he said, I'm done. Enough is enough. And weeks later, he was flying down to Mar-a-Lago to have lunch or play golf or something. So, what's behind that? It is, I honestly, Joel, I can't explain it, because to me, the values of our democracy and standing up for standing up for the rule of law, for the reality that in elections some people win and some people lose, and the way that our democracy works is that the people both parties have to be prepared to both win and lose. I'll never really fully understand it, except that to say that there is this terrible momentum behind the big lie that the president and his allies tell. 58% of Republicans, despite it's being completely false, believe that Donald Trump lost the election, that the election was stolen from the former president. And that becomes this sort of terrible machine that fuels more misunderstanding, more misinformation, more lies. And the problem is that there don't appear to be enough Republicans who are prepared to stand up to that. I was talking about Liz Cheney, who is ready to say this is what really happened and we need to have accountability. But it's tragic that there aren't more Republicans who do that.
Let's talk about that a little bit, because the president made some strong statements today, statements that many of us were waiting for. And I don't blame President Biden for saying, look, we're going to move forward. We're going to work on our agenda. We're going to do all of this. But today he sounded ticked off. He sounded like a man that really needed to get something off his chest that many of us in America had looked for him to say. I know you heard it. I know you saw it. Give me your take on it.
No, I agree with you. He sounded to me like a person who was really ready to say what he really thinks about this. And I understand very well, just as you're just saying, Joel, the tug and the pull that he experiences. He ran as the person who's going to bring our country together, a person who is going to try to find common ground, who is going to bring us back again towards, bring us forward, really. And it's hard to figure out how to do that when you're talking about the former president. But I think given the pervasiveness of the lies that have been told about the election, President Biden felt it was really the time to be clear about it. And I think he was absolutely right. And as we look to what the Justice Department is going to do, as we look at potential criminal prosecutions for this coup attempt that happened a year ago, I think we're going to need to see the same kind of clear-eyed action.
So let me ask you whether or not that's achievable, because in today's media, people confuse what I was talking about earlier versus good old-fashioned journalism. And so, if President Biden's goal was to bring us back together, I'm not sure it's achievable. And the reason I'm not is because people go out and buy their news. I want to give some examples that, the spin that's out there. When you've got Sean Hannity talking to the individuals that are behind this, that are orchestrating this, and he is the most viewed or one of the most powerful people on Fox News, how are you ever going to get word out through the media if people are being indoctrinated by someone like him?
Yeah, well, you're right. I mean, this is what I mean when I say that there is a coordinated strategy that involves all sorts of different organizations, including the right-wing news media that fuel this fire. And it was sort of shocking, although not surprising, I guess, to see how some of these Fox news stars were texting into the White House to the president, then president, former president's chief of staff, saying he's got to say something, he's got to do something. And with Sean Hannity, as you're saying, these new messages that have come out that show that was basically saying the president isn't accepting the results of the election. You know, we've got to move on. Basically, that's what he was saying. It's kind of incredible that at the same time this network continues to fuel these big lies. It's very dangerous, because in a democracy, you know, you've got to be able to have some sort of shared sense of reality. This is what happens in authoritarian countries, where there's one side that just sort of takes, not like a typical party dispute like we've always had in our country's history. It's one side that is trying to create a whole new reality.
We had that debate, and here's how my other job works in talk radio. Somebody calls, they disagree with you. It's some of the best radio you can get. Then you have a debate. But when you make a point and the other person goes quiet, you know you made a good point. So let me make this one. You've got a Hannity that's doing all that. And then a caller calls in and says, it's the same all over. Look at CNN, Joel. It's nothing but liberal media that carries that same liberal message. And I said, no, wait a second. You've got a governor in the state of New York whose name is Cuomo. You've got a personality who hosts a show on CNN whose last name is Cuomo. They're brothers. You find out that the CNN Cuomo is communicating with the governor Cuomo on how you can orchestrate a message. They fired him. The Cuomo on CNN gets fired. And so I don't think it's fair to compare all of these different media sources.
Right. Well, and I think there's a false equivalency there that is really important to call out. And I mean, I'm not denying that MSNBC and CNN have a point of view. There's nothing wrong with that. But to create a whole new reality based on false information, based on lies, is a completely different can of worms. And that's where I think we get real danger. And, let's be honest, we see the same thing happening as we struggle to live through this terrible pandemic. The same kinds of challenges of just like flat out, bad information being promoted and amplified, and it's damaging.
So last one, and I'll let you catch your flight. And I do thank you one more time for giving us this time. But in the end, many of us, count me in on that, in the words of Lindsey Graham, count me in, I'm out, that is for Merrick Garland as the Attorney General of the United States of America to do his job. And to bring rule of law into this and hold people accountable, and not just somebody who threw a chair, not just somebody who bludgeoned a law enforcement officer with the American flag, who any given day said, I don't respect the American flag. I'm talking about the people that orchestrated this. I'm talking about the people that won't adhere to a subpoena. When it comes to Merrick Garland, the halls that you live in, what's being said?
Well, I think everybody paid a lot of attention to what the Attorney General, Merrick Garland, said yesterday. He is by nature a soft-spoken person. He's not a fire and brimstone sort of a guy, but he said pretty clearly that this was about accountability, including at the top. And I think that we must be able to hold accountability, not only for sort of the violent foot soldiers that stormed the Capitol, but for the people in the inner circle that planned it, that paid for it, that created the conditions for those violent individuals to come to the state capitol. That's where we have to have accountability. And if it goes all the way to the president, I mean, I just remember what Mitch McConnell said when he voted against impeachment of the president. He said the place for accountability to rest is going to be if crimes were committed. And that is that's what the Justice Department has to grapple with and gather the evidence. And they've got to meet that moment.
Senator Smith, a year ago today caused me to say this, and I wish I didn't have to, but stay safe. Stay safe. I appreciate you coming on today.